I have been looking forward to this talk with Mike O'Brien for weeks now. Welcome to the Empathy Edge podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. What a gift. What a pleasure.
And I want to share with folks how you came on my radar because I was introduced to you through the amazing Heather Hiscox, who's been a guest on this show in the past. I'll link to her past episode in the show notes. But she has a wonderful project of webinars and gatherings called the Possibility Project. And you were a guest speaker on one of those talking about narrative intelligence.
Yeah.
And, on this show, we talk a lot about social and emotional intelligence. We talk about emotional intelligence. But that was the first time I'd heard that term of narrative intelligence. So I'm really excited to dig into that a little bit. But I want to back us up from that because
Sure.
as you mentioned before we started recording, so many of these concepts are related. It's a giant Venn diagram. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to the work that you're doing around, helping people be more human, be more compassionate, build humanization into the context of their work.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. It's interesting. The term "be more human" just struck me because sometimes I wonder about the gazer, right? And like, is it in? So the frame of my work is like constantly oscillating between like I want to be more human, then I'm like, well, wait a minute, I am fully human, and it's this lack of recognition by the things outside of me and some of the things inside of me that are suppressing and denying and distorting how that humanity is viewed, how it gets to emerge, how it is supported, nurtured, the whole nine. So that's just a thought that crossed my mind when you said that. Huh. All that being said, how I got here, theater, stories, like I was working in stories.
Theater, woo! Yeah.
I was working in stories as a young person, very fortunate to get theater training very young and very fortunate to do professional theater starting at the age of 14 all the way to 18. And being situated in the experiences of others, like the methodologies that were being used in a lot of the theater projects that I was a part of, centered other people's experiences and voices and stories and the impacts that these things would have on them. And so that was a huge part of the work and a huge manner of practicing curiosity, right? Like I got to practice curiosity
Right.
and
Well, you get to be other people too through I found those were my earliest lessons on empathy was empathizing with a character who maybe was completely not like you.
yeah, absolutely. And finding ways where you're again touching aspects of your humanity and their humanity that you might not be able to understand. So it's that compassionate interrogation piece, right? Ruth Langmore, I was watching Ozark recently, and like Ruth Langmore is such a fascinating character because I grew up very poor as well, and I would have never thought that a poor white woman in Appalachia as an adolescent and I would have a number of things in common. And so there were these moments where I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's so random that we have this thing in
Yeah.
common." I mean, I was in common, excuse me, and I would say another thing and be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." And it was great. It was another
Mhm.
reminder of like humanity is complex and so layered. So
Mhm.
these stories, these things, that's what got me here. And then I became obsessed with science and people and like, how do we work? So that
Yeah.
led me on.
Absolutely. And now you're the founder of Humanature, a design strategy firm. And you are, as we read in the intro, you're supporting organizations and leaders in centering humanity in the context of their work. Can you explain to us what that means to center humanity in the context of your work and give us an example?
Sure, yeah. So, short answer, organizations are typically organized and socialized to center everything else, outside of the humanity of their stakeholders, be they internal or external. So we center the funders, we center the outputs, the outcomes, we center the timelines, the bureaucracy, the constraints, the politics of the day. I mean, we
Yeah,
center everything else.
all of it.
And then later on, we're like, I need these really human-centered outcomes, but I have no inputs and
Well,
resources that
and like what we're experiencing now, like why are my people leaving?
yes,
We're
right.
doing so well. Everyone's performing. I don't understand, yeah.
And folks are like, you know what? My humanity matters more than this check. So I'd rather go drive for Uber and take a pay cut, but the return in value of these other things that we could put valuation to, that are outside of finances, really does matter. And that is a huge part of the work. That is a huge
Hmm.
part of what we help people understand. But that's the great resignation in a nutshell, right? It is
Exactly.
people claiming their humanity back and going, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
not for a check,
Yeah.
not for a
So
check.
how do you help them center humanity? Like what does that look like? What's a before and after?
Great question. So, in terms of what does it look like in general, it looks like people having to learn what I like to call the mechanics of our humanity, right? I'm not here to make you, or our firm's not here to make you an expert in human development, but what we are here to do is help you get the right corners on the puzzle of what it is, right? And so, from that context, we use frames. I'm a systems guy. Systems speak in the language of behavior, not outputs and outcomes. I've heard that from a number of really great uh, systems theorists and organizational cultural specialists, and I really love that phrasing because you can focus so much on having the right language around your outputs and outcomes that you don't focus on the behaviors that are supposed to produce those things. Because you can get all, if you think about a logic model, for those of us that have to use those crazy things, they're helpful, but they're also a problem in and of themselves. We weaponize them against groups of people all the time. But you can get all the outputs and outcomes wrong, the right side of the logic model. You can get all of that wrong, have the right inputs, the right assumptions lifted up, and the right activities and produce the right outputs and outcomes, even if they're not on that page. But the inverse is not true, right? You
Mm,
cannot have the wrong activities and produce the right outcomes. That doesn't work,
interesting.
right? And
Interesting.
so this is a lot of what I mean around like centering the humanity. You gotta center this in the fact that humans behave, we do things, we don't do things. And there are a number of levers, of pressure points, of influencers that are close. In the language of human ecologists, we would say it's proximal, it's close to us. And then
Hmm.
there are things that are very distal and distant, but they're all having an influence on us. So we help people, again, getting the corners on the puzzle of these things. We just help give them some systems based frames, like the health sciences model of human development. We talk about social ecological theory, but I'm using language that's a little more close to people. And
Right.
we use, I mind the wisdom of experience. People live in these systems. We've been living in them since we were born. There's an experiential knowledge and wisdom that you have of navigating living in systems that are embedded in systems and systems and other systems. There's
Hmm.
an experiential knowledge and wisdom you have of occupying multiple identities and having stressors across those things collide, and you still have to go to work and raise your kids and do this and do so. There's
Exactly. And that's that realization that's happening now is that and I have admitted this on this show that when I was in my 20s, I was very much like there was personal Maria and there was work Maria, right?
Mhm.
But if we've learned anything from the pandemic and seeing people on Zoom in their own homes with their kids and their dogs and in their bedrooms and in their home offices, that line is blurring, and it should blur because you don't park your humanity at the door when you go into an office. Like there is there really a difference between work life and home life? Shouldn't you have the same values? You have the same behaviors, the same personality traits? Shouldn't what's happening in the world culturally, socially, in the news impact you as a human being when you sit down at your desk to do data entry, or you sit down at your desk to do collaboration with a colleague? And I think that realization is finally happening for people. Do you see that happening too?
Absolutely, because to your point of like, shouldn't it? I challenge people and go, it does. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether or not you want to believe it,
Whether you
right?
want it or not. Yeah, exactly. It's
This is
happening. Yeah.
just what it is, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I go back to the idea of the mechanics of our humanity. There are places and spaces, if you will, in that context of like, how do I want to impact people? Well, we just have it all wrong. Like, so for example, with the health sciences model of human development, it says that humans develop in four dimensions that are co-occurring, they're happening at the same time, and they're dynamic, they're influencing one another. That's the biological, the psychological, the social, and the fourth is spiritual. But spiritual is, in this context, not based on theology or religion. It's about the dimension of meaning making, that
Right.
humans are creatures of meaning making, and we will make meaning even when it's not supplied to us. This is where we get into the bias area of life and
Mm-hmm.
all the things we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about in the 21st century. So the context here, I think, for folks is to recognize and realize you actually don't get the choice or option of saying things like, or let me rephrase that. You can say whatever you want. You don't get the option of like true impact and control in the context of I'm a teacher or I'm an employee or a manager and I don't want to have an impact on somebody's biological well-being today. I'm just going to affect their psychological well-being or their psychological development. That's not
Right.
how that works. You don't have that choice.
Right.
But we do have the choice on how we impact somebody's psychological development or their social well-being or whatever construct we want to lay on top of the fact that we develop in these four categories. So we
Mm-hmm.
have it's about how, not if,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we have to pay attention to the environments that we're developing in, because those environments are biological, psychological, social,
Mm-hmm.
and spiritual, or in the dimension of our meaning making. So when we center humanity in the context of our work, it is the recognition that, to your point, should? Mm-mm, it does. So, Maria coming to work with a sick child, there is something that is happening to her in the form of stress, in the form of care and concern, that is going to impact her work. That's normal. There are no magic thresholds. I call out a thing in my workshops all the time. There is no such thing as magic threshold theory. You don't get to cross a threshold and divorce yourself from the cares of the world, but we
Right.
socialize that with school age children, and then that metastasizes over time, and we grow up with this expectation in work, and that those are all fallacies and lies. And we are finally, like, it's like the Wizard of Oz. We're like pulling the curtain back and going, oh gosh, is that how this really works?
So have you seen the show Severance?
No. Should
So,
I?
yes, because the whole premise of that show is that your memory is erased when you come to work. There's a company, a corporation that exists, so you actually don't know what your life is outside of the building. And when you leave, you don't know what you've done at work.
Wow.
It's a contract you sign when you work with this company. And I only got it's really good. People have seen more of the episodes. I've only gotten through two because it's relentless tension. But I can't remember. I'll have to look it up and put a link in the show notes. I can't remember if it's Netflix or Amazon Prime, but you need to check it out because it's exactly that point where there's a fictitious organization that's created this model where they can separate what people do outside. So when you leave work, you don't even know who your coworkers are. You might
Wow.
see them in the real world and you don't know that they're your coworkers. It's like a
That is frightening.
I know, right? It's like a chip they implant or something. Um, but I want to get to this idea of, um, well, first I want to back up because what you're talking about, do you solve that issue or help solve that issue for organizations through training? Is it through policy and organizational redesign? Is
It's
it, how
all
do
of
you
it.
solve that?
Yeah, so it's all of it, right? And what I mean by all of it is everybody's on a different journey and at a different place. You can't redesign with knowledge you don't have,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is a learning journey. So we believe in any work that is centered in, what I call the common new language of DEI, REI, belongingness at work, etc. Any of that stuff has to be centered in a culture of learning at the organization that's sustainable,
Mm,
or none of that works.
right.
Because to there's a great phrase that I'm not sure who originated it. I've seen it now ascribed to a couple of different folks. But I will say this, it's definitely not mine, and I'd be happy to get you the note or
It's all good. Just
a couple of
I'm
folks.
finding
So,
most of the quotes that we take for granted from people are actually falsely ascribed to
that's
those famous people. Yeah.
so it's a quote that says diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an activity, and belongingness is an outcome. And I love it because it's such a simple statement that allows people to have their own like little personal logic model
Oh
theory
my
of change
gosh, that's
in that
brilliant.
word. Isn't that
Can
beautiful?
you
I
say that one? Can you say that one more time for us?
yeah, diversity is a fact. Inclusion, excuse me, equity is a choice. Inclusion is an activity, and belongingness is an outcome.
Oh, so good.
Beautiful. And
Yeah.
but this starts with the idea, and I love that my favorite phrase. Oh, let's play guessing games real quick. Which one of those phrases do you think is my favorite? Probably.
I think was it inclusion as an act?
It's that I do love that one.
Yeah.
Diversity is a fact.
And that's actually pretty powerful. Like we shouldn't be arguing about if there's a thing called diversity. It just is.
The natural. I use a lot of the ecological world that's non-human as a space of wisdom and processing, and as
Mm-hmm.
the science of it, the
Mm-hmm.
how do self-organizing biological systems work? What is the method to the madness there, right? It seems if you just don't think hard about it, it seems like it's all just kind of chaos and just happening. But you start studying the patterns, and you're like, this is bizarre. How this is actually
Mm-hmm.
organizing itself, and
Mm-hmm.
there are um, nuances and things that we have learned and enhanced our humanity
Mm-hmm.
actually from studying the biological world that is,
Mm-hmm.
in air quotes, not human. And so that world is hyper diverse.
Mm-hmm. It's also hyper collaborative. I did an episode with James Ehrlich, who's building the neighborhood of the future, and
Mm,
they're building it with the concept of what we can learn from ecology and
yes.
how network systems collaborate without us even realizing it and actually build a neighborhood of the future that is just as collaborative as a forest or a grove. So I'll
That's,
put a link to that one in the show
yeah,
notes too.
please.
um I want to talk
There's
about this
also
concept
a
of
great book, if I could,
oh
that's on it.
yeah, go ahead.
This came out. It's called The Social Instinct: How Cooperation Shaped the World. I think it came out 2021. Yeah, August 2021. I'm currently reading. I'm halfway done.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Because what I appreciate about her, same kind of looking at ecology, looking at
Mm-hmm.
virology. I mean, she's looking at a million different things and
Right.
humans, but she also points out like the negative side of collaboration, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it, like collaboration just is a thing. It can produce positive things, but particularly as humans, we collaborate around some really negative and nasty things too. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also a part of our humanity. And so centering our humanity in the context of what we do in policy means we have to understand that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Why does dehumanization matter?
That's a great follow-up question. You're really good at this. Uh,
I try.
Dehumanization matters because it is the default practice for so many countries that would be considered part of the, in air quotes, Western world,
Mm-hmm.
that the construction of, let's get to a little technical, but like the construction of the concepts that govern the society in terms of political economy
Mm-hmm.
were not rooted in ideologies that were egalitarian. They were
Mm-hmm.
not about
Or
this.
centered around people. Yeah.
There's no concept of shared humanity in that world and for
Mm-mm.
them, right? Like that
Mm-mm.
wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you have when we think about narrative and even narrative intelligence, what you have is you have words and you have writings that speak to these grand ideas, and then you have policy and behaviors and practices that do a totally opposite thing. And
Right.
so if you don't name it, it's confusion. And what you end up with, what we have in America in particular, is the mythos of goodness and the mythos of intentionality as a metric. And that's dangerous. And we've seen the outputs and outcomes from those dangerous activities over centuries. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's time to name the thing what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and so we can actively organize around what we want that's the opposite of that. So
Right.
for me, dehumanization at one end of the spectrum, and that dehumanization gives rise and root to ableism, sexism, racism, classism, nationalism, homophobia, transphobia, we can go down that list. And the opposite end of the spectrum is a simple term that I use in my own work and practice called shared humanity. But it's a journey to get from one end of that spectrum to the other,
Mm-hmm.
which is where in my work I talk about just transitions and just systems of transitions. I'm not the originator of that idea or concept.
Mm-hmm.
Movements have used this, the climate change world,
Right.
activists use this terminology too, but I just adopted in my world with these systems that we have to iterate ourselves towards
Right.
what inclusion as an activity looks like because we don't fully
Right.
know. So it is an experiment, it's a practice, and that's to your point around what do we do? What does it look like? Well, we got to learn some things. Then we have to design with intentionality,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that dehumanization is at the root. It's dehumanizing to have to see yourself as a worker and not a human, and therefore the stresses of the day, if they impact your productivity, shame on you. That's dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, how do you undo that? How do we
Mm-hmm.
reimagine a workforce that is undergirding the mechanics of our humanity and producing well-being, as opposed to one that's completely exploitative and just sucks and sucks and
Mm-hmm.
sucks. And if you die in the journey, we'll
Well, and
do
I
a
think
cake in your honor.
what's so exciting to me and why I wrote the book was that there are so many organizations and leaders that are adopting that lens and they're still succeeding. We've had this binary that if you are going to center around humanity, that means you're a nonprofit and you're not really making any money, or that means that you're not going to be as competitive as another organization. And we've got so many bold leaders and organizations, and it sounds like the organizations that you work with as well, that are like, no, we can, my mantra for this show is that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. And I think
Absolutely.
those leaders and organizations that are doing the work of centering humanity in their models and in their processes and in their systems, they still want success. They're not settling. They still want to thrive. They still want to add value. They still want to make money. And they can. It's a false choice we've given ourselves that it has to be one or the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is there are examples around the globe
Totally.
this not working this way or things not working the way it does in America and people still making money and being productive. Germany
Right.
has been working with a 20-hour work week probably as long as we've been writing think papers about it at this point, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even maybe
Mm-hmm.
even longer if I'm remembering some of the
Mm-hmm.
documents I've read. And their productivity is not
Well,
down. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, look at all the countries that provide like, maternal leave and family leave and all of that. And they're industrialized countries. Like they're producing, they have GDP.
right.
They're
It's,
doing the things, right? So I want to talk about in this concept of dehumanization mattering, this idea of what it means to be, you talk about what it means to be developmentally informed. And
yeah.
that's where we're going to dive down to the concept that caught my attention, which is narrative intelligence. But what does it mean to be developmentally informed and why does it matter?
Yeah, so I love that we're, going down this route because in a world, thinking back to that concept of political economy and the way that society gets structured and the way that culture works, right? So I like to think about policy in two buckets of categories. One is formal policy. So these are things that are legislated or written down, they're in a handbook, they're
Mm-hmm.
ratified and agreed upon. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you deny me the things that are there, there's some body or group of people that I can go to and yell and be like, you didn't give me the thing, and here's the
Right.
thing, and I can bring that.
Right. Right.
Informal policy is trickier and where a lot of the nuance of our demise, I think, as a country is really nestled. And these are the things that are not legislated nor written down, but are practiced so regularly that if you took an academic approach through research, you could codify and call a thing and stand it up with data. So, as an example, unequal pay for women That's not legislated or written down in any group. It's not in a handbook. We got decades of data, and people get to still act like, I didn't know. I go, oh my, well, it's implicit bias, right? And so even
Yeah.
the way we're organizing the stories around DEI and
Yeah.
sharing the science around social cognitive bias, someone said once recently, and it was interesting because they reversed it by the end after I explained this whole thing to them. They were like, "Oh, Michael, that's a jarring statement." But what I say is, there's a lot of snake oil salespeople in this DEI work, and
Mm-hmm.
it's messy. And I'm on a rampage, like, no, 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 no. We're gonna clean this up. This is hard. Everything's not implicit bias, and
Mm-hmm.
everything's not explicit bias. A lot of things are somewhere in the middle, and they got this thing popping off with this mechanism. It's being
Right.
human is complex, but we don't realize the easy pathways out that we are giving very powerful institutions, that we are giving people that might not even be powerful, but want to actively engage in hateful activities and harmful things against other people. We're giving them an easy out by being like, oh, it was implicit, but I just didn't know. No, you did know. You were aware.
Yeah.
You were aware you didn't want to hire those black people. You were aware you
Yeah.
didn't want to let the mothers have
Yeah.
time off
You
because
knew
your
you
boss.
paid you knew you paid that woman less than her colleague. Like you knew that. Right.
In the
Oh my gosh.
spreadsheets. Now, don't get
So
me wrong. Some things can be, you can see it and not see it. That is
of
a
course,
reality.
of course. Or you could just accept that that's the way it is, right?
Sure.
Without thinking
Right.
about it. And so what does that mean in terms of developmentally informed? Does it mean that you understand that those you sort of can't unsee those things once you see them?
So, what it means is that policy exists in these two places,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we have to, going back to the root of dehumanization, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
rooted in that space and we're socialized to it. The metaphor I'll give you is like a fish doesn't know it's out of water. Excuse me, it's in water till it's out of water,
Right.
right?
Right.
The water's just there. You're just in it. You're just
Mm-hmm.
doing your thing, right? And that's where we're at. So to become developmentally informed means that you're taking a step back to go, I don't understand fully what it means to think about the well-being of all of the residents of this country in the context of policymaking, be
Right.
it formal or informal.
Or the employees of this organization,
Right.
right? Or
And
the
if I
members of this
don't,
group.
the people on my block, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the parents at my school. And if I don't intentionally and purposefully engage in a learning journey, both of the experiences of the people that are here, but also from the end of going back to my own language, the mechanics of our humanity, I will probably end up making lots of mistakes in crafting policy, procedures, and practices, even with my good heart and my great intentions. This is why
Mm-hmm.
again I call it the mythos of goodness and the
Mm-hmm.
mythos of good intention and their
Mm-hmm.
inappropriateness as metrics.
Right. So, where does the concept of narrative intelligence that piqued my interest fall in this? Is this about how we open our eyes to the stories that we hear, the stories that we tell? Talk to us a little bit about that and how that fits into what you're talking about.
So I'm going to give you a couple of major buckets. It might feel like a fire hose to folks, but I'm going to try to keep it like, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. This is about digging in over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's take the idea, and I'm trying to string things along for people and scaffold this through the whole conversation. Hopefully, folks are picking that part up. When we think about being developmentally informed in the context of the recognition that dehumanization is a thing, we have to also consider that over the last 20 to 30 years, we've learned a lot about human beings. Technology has afforded us the opportunity to do all kinds of interdisciplinary research, observing brains in real time. I mean, there's just so much we can do
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't available 100 years ago. So we're fighting a narrative fight around what it means to be human.
Yes.
And it's not, we're not doing a good job with the science that we have that we can stand on and go, no, 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 there's no, you don't get options there, actually. That's not what that doesn't need to be an argument, actually. From a policy standpoint, that's just a fact,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the narrative fight is over facts right now, which is
Mm-hmm.
a little bizarre, but it's okay because we're human and we're figuring it out. So, in this context of being developmentally informed and thinking about adolescence, Biology says that adolescence now ends at the earliest between the ages of 24 and 26. There are a number of policies across a number of sectors that are completely inappropriate developmentally. I don't even. I'll spare us going down the rabbit hole and naming all of them, but I think people probably have some that are coming to mind. But our expectation management, the
Right.
stories we tell ourselves about 18 to 26-year-olds is going to have to dramatically shift.
Yes.
And so, in that context, narrative intelligence would allow us to interrogate what stories have formed our larger thoughts and opinions, the narratives that we believe about 18 to 26-year-olds.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that we should also do really quickly is differentiate between a story and a narrative. A narrative is about a big idea, big concepts, values, ways of understanding and seeing about, seeing something in the world, a particular thing or concept, large groups of people, even. A story is a particular instance of a situation or a thing that backs the narrative up. So, a
Hmm.
fantastic metaphor I read online was using a string of pearls and a necklace as the example, and saying that a story is an individual pearl on the necklace. The whole necklace is the narrative. So, when you
Right.
think about something like the American dream, there are a ton of stories from
That's the
Mike,
narrative. Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
Oprah is a story there. And, pick whatever migrant from whatever country
Yeah.
coming
Ellis
here.
Island is the story there. Yeah. All of it.
So
Hmm.
all of that is playing a role in how we understand and believe and work with the American dream in this country. And what narrative intelligence is about, because there's this AI version of narrative intelligence, which starts to, I won't say it's a version, it's one aspect of narrative intelligence where we are in real time recording what people say and analyzing it. Like they can do sentiment analysis to figure out, like, based on the language you're using, what are the emotional potential underpinnings and things that are there, or what kinds of things might you be framing in your language to get someone to kind of move in a particular direction or not. Or, I mean, there's all kind of analysis you can run there. But the other side of narrative intelligence is that humans have organized through story for millennia, arguably since we've been human with one another, and it does shape your mental models, your worldviews. It will shape how you see things, how you understand things. That's why bias from an academic perspective is called social cognitive bias. The narratives and stories and interpretations of the world that you've been nested in
Hmm.
since birth, that are coming through multiple dimensions. Remember, things that are close and proximal, things that are distant. Close and proximal, stories in your household, stories in your neighborhood, family
Hmm.
stories. Distant, but close because of technology for us. This is tricky.
Right.
Media, right?
Right.
When everything was
Right.
just in a book and everybody couldn't read 300 years ago.
Right. This is why the specialization, for lack of a better word, the fragmentation of media is so important because there used to just be radio, right? There used to just be your neighbors, right? And then radio, and then movies, and then TV had used to have three networks. That was it. That's where you got all your information. Now there's thousands of cable channels, there's millions of YouTube channels, there's however many bazillion podcasts out there. Like the places where we're getting those narratives and those stories has just exponentially grown. And that's where, on the one hand, that's beautiful to amplify so many different voices. On the other hand, we get into a situation where our country is now, where people believe the truth of the source that they trust, the one
Yeah,
that is just like them. And
yeah.
now we don't have a shared agreement on what is truth and what is fiction. And so
And
is narrative intelligence, like as a skill, narrative intelligence, part of being able to discern and be aware of and be critical of the stories that you're hearing, where they're coming from, who's telling them?
I think so. And that
Okay.
also includes something called media literacy, right? Like, a
Yes.
lot, again, you heard me say before, I'm all about Venn diagram circles. So much of our humanity is found in the
Yeah.
intersections of things, of multiple things, as
Hmm.
opposed to verticals, right? Like, that's
Right.
just not how life works, whether it's again, vegetative or whether it's human, whether it's just mammalian, it doesn't matter. More things are connected than they are these clear verticals. So, yes, the idea of narrative intelligence does include, I think, a healthy sense of narrative intelligence does include media literacy, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
should,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for all of the nuances you just named, because there are good and bad outcomes connected to and outputs connected to this ubiquity of the presence of media channels that could healthily challenge some of the things that existed before. Because when you go back in time to what you were talking about, where like there were these agreed upon truths and it was harder to get in there and break things up. I mean, these agreed upon truths that black people were three-fifths of a person, right? That indigenous Americans didn't deserve to
Mm-hmm.
be here. We could
And
just
they
grab
and
them.
they weren't in your neighborhood, so you didn't hear their stories. You didn't hear those narratives, and so you made assumptions about them.
Yes, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic point. I often tell my clients, once we're going through our scaffolded learning process to get to design, it's like you got to be cognizant of the fact that you will meet narratives and stories about groups of people before you ever meaningfully engage in relationship with them. And you
Mm.
there's I read a lot on the science of the imagination and imaginative faculty, and there's a whole lot there that is fascinating. But this is what pushed me into like policy has to be developmentally appropriate. We need new design mechanisms for how to even iterate policy and get it out and shift it towards
Mm-hmm.
being, human focused in a particular kind of way that can honor everyone's humanity. And I'll stop there with this. And this is why narrative intelligence also matters and the interrogation of the mental model that you have or mental models that you have of the world and of people. There's this woman, Eleanor Mitt, fascinating researcher. She's looked at imagination in a couple of different contexts, and she studies a lot in this area that's fascinating. But one of the things that she's picked up in the nuance of her research is that it looks as if things that are closer to you, be they physical, psychological, or like social, relational, you will imagine more. You tend to imagine more with pictures around those things than things that are distant from you in any of those categories. So it's interesting because identity can make it hard to empathize in that context.
Mm-hmm.
People start to empathize with words and ideas in that context. And pictures in the mind have a much more emotional, visceral, physiological
Mm-hmm.
impact on the brain and body. What's fascinating there, though, is like if empathizing or trying to put yourself and imagine yourself in my shoes to try to create policy that's going to help me in an area that you have no touch point with, that might be difficult in a particular kind of way. But the flip side is if you can imagine the terror that a black person, for example, might exact on your life, though you've never grown up around a black person, if that feels close to you psychologically, close to you socially, even though it might not be close to you physically, your body, it's conjecture, but it seems like it's primed to imagine that with a picture. So
Mm-hmm.
imagining my well-being through policy is going to be in words predominantly. Imagining me as a threat because of the way, in particular, media works, right? Visuals around these things, the whole nine. You're going to be more prone to have a visceral, picture-based reaction to that kind of stuff that
Mm.
might not even have words connected to it.
Mm.
You have more symbols for things than you have words as a
Right.
human being, which is fascinating. So you could feel things and see things, not have words, but your behavior will
Right.
follow suit, right?
Right. And I think this leads us into a good discussion about, we talked about this before we started recording, the events that unfolded in Buffalo a few
Hmm.
weeks ago and the tragic murder of many innocent people based on the color of their skin
Hmm.
by an 18-year-old, what appears to be an 18-year-old white nationalist, white supremacist. And I mentioned to you that I saw so much on social media around the fact, well, first of all, he's 18. Secondly, people conjecturing or people wondering what were the stories told to this boy that led him to these actions? What were the narratives that shaped him? And as a mom of an 8-year-old, understanding how easy it is to shape your children with narratives, it can take a minute to teach love or hate with an answer to a question.
Mm-hmm.
My son, when he was 3 or 4, was in the back of our car and asked me why at his daycare his friend had two moms.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer was, families come in all shapes and sizes. There's two moms, there's two dads, there's a mom and dad, there's one dad, there's one mom. Families are all about love. And at 3 or 4, he said, okay, and just took that as truth. And that's how easy it is to teach love, or the opposite, teach hate. And so there's been a lot of conversation about, to your point earlier, about the mind of an 18 to a 26-year-old. What is the role of the narratives that young people are being told as they grow up, of adults that are hearing new narratives and subscribing to them without any, like you said, close experience with those groups of people?
Yeah. Couple of things in this area, right? One, I want to recognize what you said, that this 18-year-old is a boy.
Mm-hmm.
He is a developer, he's a
His
teenager.
brain's not fully developed yet.
As much as these young black and brown boys,
Mm-hmm.
right, and young girls, or these young folks, even, right, not to even overgenderize everybody, but these
Mm-hmm.
young folks who are of color, who are typically ascribed adulthood very early, like 16, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think about Khalif, is his name Khalif Browder out of New York, who, what a, at 16, it was legal in New York to put a boy in jail with adults, developmentally inappropriate, top to bottom. This is why
Mm-hmm.
we have to become developmentally informed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to first situate that,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
that is a thing. And so that doesn't mean this 18-year-old should not be held accountable.
Right. I think that's where people get confused.
Right. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not what I'm saying at all. He unfortunately did something that was absolutely heinous, and he needs to be held accountable. But I think, to maybe a point I think we're pointing out, is there's a network of people around him who are arguably even more accountable. I don't know who they are. They might not be his parents, but it's somebody and something. And there are people at varying levels of government who
Mm-hmm.
have allowed this rhetoric at the national level for
Mm-hmm.
decades, right? And there are people in uh, non-governmental positionality that have organized for channels to keep producing these messages in mass. It's not just a niche or niche thing like people want to be led to believe,
Well, I
right?
think people want to feel like they can put the bad guy away and the problem will go away. They want to feel like it's that neat and tidy.
Yeah.
And yet, you've got influential personalities spewing narratives and spewing stories that are untrue, that are influencing the actions of many, many people, and they're not being held accountable for that. I mean, we can look at conservative media. And just the other day I heard someone use the analogy to this of Osama bin Laden did not fly the planes into the World Trade Center. People listening to him fly their planes into the World Trade Center. Yet we held Osama bin Laden accountable. So
Yeah.
why
That is
can't we hold
right.
the other people that are inciting these acts accountable? And kind of getting back to our main point, I know we're going off on so many tangents, which I love, which is this idea of like the narratives that you hear shape you. And we have
100%.
to be more critical of not critical in the like I hate this, but critical in the sense of discerning about where we get our information, what information we're getting, who is telling us this information, and what's their motivation.
And is it costing me anything, right?
Right, right.
I wanna loop back around to that, to with organizational culture and professionalism, because that's a place
Yes.
where we
Yeah.
interrogate narrative, and
Well,
it's a
and this is
tangible.
why we're weaving this in like to
Yeah,
politics
yeah,
and
yeah.
organizations, because it's all about systems of people. It's all about organizations of people, whether it's a government or it's a software company.
Absolutely, 100%, right? People ideate, design, and power these systems, right? Systems are a people-based thing. That's why
Mm-hmm.
they speak in behaviors, right? Because they're people-based things. But with that said, right, one thing I'll highlight and the point around the responsibility we have with narratives, which is why I get into the narrative intelligence thing, both from a biological kind of psychological mechanics end, but then also from a systems and like society, social ecological, how does this thing work in the way that humans have designed the systems we live in. Replacement theory is a term being thrown around right now and people are talking about it, has its roots in race suicide, is literally the same concept,
And tell
just
listeners
renamed.
what you mean by that.
Yeah, so race suicide was an
No,
ideology.
replacement theory.
Oh,
What you mean by
oh,
replacement theory?
so replacement theory, I'll explain replacement theory and race suicide at the same time
At the
because
same
they
time, yeah.
literally are the
Just
same
in
thing.
case folks are not
Yeah.
familiar. Yeah.
So it's this concept that there's a group of people or groups of people coming into the country or rising up from inside the country through population increase, and they are taking the place, the rights, the access to well-being through jobs and
They're
income
taking, they're a threat. Yeah.
from the dominant group in power, which in this country is white people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because the history of whiteness in this country, I think a lot of white people got to really dig into that. When we're talking about race suicide, there are people who are now white that when race suicide was out as a large conversation in academic, theological, and political circles and being talked about by presidents like Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Mm-hmm. And talk
This
about race.
it,
What is race suicide? Explain that
well,
concept.
it's the same it's the same literal thing, just a
Okay.
different title.
Different
Race
title.
suicide is the actually, you know what? There is a little nuance. Race suicide is a little more specific to intentionality and blame. So white people were practicing race suicide by not repopulating, women not repopulating. That's the speech that Teddy Roosevelt was giving. I should send you the link to put it in the notes, actually. It's
Mm-hmm.
on women and their role. They must reproduce to increase the race because if the race decreases, you have all of these other problems with these people coming to replace you and
Mm.
take your stuff, right? And so even the way we think about abortion laws and the attack on abortion laws being next to replacement theory and these activities, these are not isolated conversations. They've never been. We just changed jargon and conversations are no longer popular because of explicit bias. Explicit bias is when I know I have a thing going on here that's for or against the thing, and I'm choosing to be quiet or shift how I talk about it for PC purposes, for political correctness purposes. That doesn't change what's going on behind the scenes and where you're not being silent, where it's safe to not be silent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we have is replacement theory having its root in race suicide. That was a very popular idea, again, across all platforms and spaces, and it never went away. And here it is. I remember listening to Donald Trump on his first campaign trail. I've been reading on eugenics for a long time because of its relationship to educational systems and testing and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had this. I always thought it was random knowledge until I heard things coming out of Donald Trump's mouth that I was like, whoa, wait. That's like textbook. Like I can go
Mm-hmm.
pick that up out of a number of passages. Oh, eugenics didn't leave as a concept. Those beliefs, the cultural underpinnings, those narratives are not gone. And I started to think about the way that they talk about Mexicans and labor. I spent a lot of time working with, well, I would say a lot. I spent on and off 40 years working with migrant farm working children in Florida and getting to know their parents through a great program down there called In Familia. This is in Homestead, Florida in the Everglades. Program, a nonprofit In Familia partnered with a group out of New York called a Step Artist Striving in Poverty. And we would go down and do these camps for the kids. There's free arts camps and whatnot. But I would learn about the plight there and the lived experience and also get exposed to the rhetoric from conservative media, from conservative research think tanks. And I'm just like, wait, this isn't even based in reality, right? The Federal Reserve Bank in that region was actively printing out stuff to challenge the misinformation around like the way migrants were supposedly sucking up benefits. Actually, that's not true. Here's the data, right? So here I am, like in this world, like what is happening? And again, and here looping back around, you hear this rhetoric, you see it lining up, and it's like, oh, this has been the move since the late 1880s and the beginnings of economics as a discipline
Right.
in academic study.
Oh boy, so much in there. So, like I said, we're dancing between very, very political and cultural um, issues and also bringing it down to the organizational level. How do these concepts relate to the future of work?
Yeah, this is good. Let's go back to
Let's
professionalism as an idea.
because those, I think those are the spheres most of us can control.
Yeah,
I mean, we can control the political spheres by voting, by getting involved. I don't want to leave anybody with
I
the
hear that.
perception that they can't control that. But more immediately,
Yes.
we can start this movement of rehumanizing our systems and our policies in the places where we work. So
Yeah.
talk to us about how these concepts relate to the future of work and what I hope is an optimistic view in your opinion.
Yeah, and I have, it's funny for all of this analysis, I have a ton of optimism here. And sometimes I don't even know why, but I do. Well, I'll tell you why I do. Because humans have been around on this planet longer than capitalism, right? We've been on this planet longer than racism. We've been on this planet longer than a lot of the atrocities that we've organized. And don't get me wrong,
They're
we
still
have
bad.
died, right? Like we've been
Yeah.
in war, we've been doing war for a long time, right? We're also violent,
Yeah.
but we have a beautiful side to us that we could be investing in more and more and more. And so this is about conscious evolution now, right? We have technology that is compounding how fast the species can and does evolve with intentionality. And now, with intention, with consciousness, we can be better and quicker, right? And for generations to come, do something that is probably unparalleled in the history of our species, unless, this is us repeating a cycle. Maybe we were more technologically advanced 20,000 years ago and we ruined the world or something, right? Anyway, all that being said, I go back to professionalism. I noted that before. I want to bring it down to something really micro and thinking and stringing together the dehumanization, the narrative intelligence piece, and what we can do. One of the things I do with clients all the time that are interested in, like, how do we shift our hiring practices to be more equitable? How do we think about upward mobility in a more equitable manner? I have people dig into their narratives and beliefs. So narratives, I help people translate a little bit and go like, what's the big idea, big message, big belief here about professionalism? Right? Let's write that you for you. Let's write those
Mm-hmm.
down. What are the stories that back that up for you? Right? And then I say, where did those things come from? Because none of us are
Mm.
born
No.
understanding professionalism. We learn that.
Yeah.
And so this is a practice of what I call compassionate interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to use narrative intelligence to dig into what's there. And this gets into this issue of the nature of implicit bias. If it's implicit, that means that it's unconscious. That means that there's two main things I'll point out here. One, you can't like actively just be like, I'm gonna know all my biases and list out all my implicit biases. Like it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is even when you might touch it, it's not gonna feel like bias. It's gonna feel like something else. And it's
Mm-hmm.
probably gonna feel right. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're not like the
Right.
idea that you naturally fall into this space of finding all your biases and making a
What's so
change.
interesting about this is the conflict between generations in the workplace as well. So I'm reading, so many articles. I mean, I was so hopeful to read all about, and research all about what Gen Z is trying to do, millennials are trying to do to change the way we work, to change corporate culture for the better, to make demands that we, Gen X earlier than me, were too afraid to ask for, or just didn't know we could ask for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they are demanding a new kind of workplace, a new kind of culture. They're also changing the rule, well, it's always been done in this way, professionalism. I was just reading an article the other day about what is professional communication, right?
Right. That's
Because they're a
exactly right.
generation born of text and email and WhatsApp and whatever, and they are casualizing corporate communications, and it's causing this huge clash And that's where it's like, okay, sit everybody down. Why do you believe that this is more professional writing than this is? Right. When how they're writing is actually how people talk. So that was just one example that popped into my head as you were talking about these things that are, this is what I always talk about in my empathy talks. Workplace culture, professionalism, whatever, is not a law of physics. It's a
No, right.
human construct that we created. And so we can change it for the
Yes.
better if we want to. And so I feel like that's what you're saying, is that there's these things that we never, there's many things that we don't think about how we got there. And we just assume it is a law of physics, that it is. And it
And
doesn't
to that
have to be.
Absolutely. And to that point, looping back around and what does it cost you?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people that we go through that journey, and then I get to that point of like, is there any potential that it cost you something? People are like, you know what? Actually, that was so stressful when I was 24, and I da 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 da, and it made me hate this, and then all this stuff just starts coming up to things that are
Yep.
even more recent that they just didn't have the liberty to give voice to, right? But it
Right.
was there, and so it's interesting. So, and to your point, people are communicating the way that they communicate for the purposes of solving whatever problem they're supposed to solve. If it's working, does that mean it's unprofessional? Listen, that doesn't mean we should be at work calling, just throwing an F bomb
Cursing
around.
each other out. Yeah.
Clearly, there's some limits here, but we can figure out what that means and
Right.
what those things are.
Right.
People
But
don't have to get
I think
fired
the
for the F
point is
bomb
that can, yeah. And I think the point is that can change over time. It's okay. It's okay for that to evolve. Because again, it's not a law of physics. It's a human construct.
And into that idea of the human constructs, right? We are biologically driven to do us and them, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's actually the hard part about making sense of our humanity and looking at the nuances of informal policy. Because if it wasn't race, it'd be something else. If it wasn't gender identity, it'd be something else. We could all be the same skin color. It'd be do you have freckles or not, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it would it
Yeah.
would be
Are you a Yankees or Red Sox fan? Yeah, exactly.
something, right? And in that context with us and them, even in this professionalism context, it's so interesting to hear things about professional communication, and that's just the way things are done. And if you want to build a thing like this, you got to da da da. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because the higher up I climb the ladder, it's interesting where the conversations are happening. I'm seeing more business deals over beers and on a golf course, and you don't. The language is not,
Professional.
fill in the blank. So it's interesting that even in that
Yeah.
context, there's a little bit of like, us and theming, but
Mm-hmm.
you to your elders probably are doing what you think we're doing, right? But this is also generational and it happens.
It happens
So
all the time. Yeah.
step out of it, and to your point, we can just be a little more inclusive and try something different.
Right. Exactly. All right. As we wrap up, can you tell folks about the Empathy Lab? Because we're going to have a link to that in the show
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah.
Your
Oh, you
project.
are? Okay, then I got to get you the right deck because that one's a little more geared toward. I'll get you the right link. How about
Okay.
that?
Great.
That was a little more geared towards funders. But the thing here with Empathy Lab is the name is going to change because a simple Google search let me know that trademark is going to be hard.
Yeah.
But the goal behind Empathy Lab is a place to practice and interrogate the notion of empathy as a practice, right? And it's a space to drive meaningful change and to engage in a true change management process that undergirds whether it's DEI, REI, belongingness at work, whatever language people want to use. It's rooted in this idea of exploring the mechanics of our humanity, exploring a lot of the ideas you heard today, doing practical design work in that space, learning some skills and methodologies that you can take back with you to the workplace to both start the compassionate interrogation journey and the intentional change, the intentional design
Mm-hmm.
that's needed to result in belongingness. This is where
Mm-hmm.
inclusion
And
is an activity. You gotta do stuff.
yeah. And to get back to, full circle, center humanity in our work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. Well,
You have a diverse workforce and we're not all taught to socialize to each other and our needs, our own
right.
needs. Like, it's a
Right.
lot. So
Right.
Empathy Lab is a 6 month long, the big version of Empathy Lab, or the full version, we call it 6 months, bi-weekly. You get these sessions that are learning and design based. You come in teams from an employer, and outside of those sessions, every other time we're not in session, any individual can have office hours with a coach on our team, and then each team gets 6 hours of consulting work afterwards with us, and it's a fun but challenging process. People stay in touch with us. We did the full version, and we still got clients that came out of that, or people that just hit us up. They're like, "What are you up to?
That's
We want to
awesome.
learn more." It's been
That's
great, and we're
awesome.
doing
So
a small version now too.
we'll have a link to that for folks as well. Mike, oh my God, what a great conversation. Thank
Thank
you
you. Yeah, this was great.
I could talk to you for, like I always say this to my guests, I could talk to you for 3 more hours, but we're going to have all your links in the show notes. But for folks on the go, where's the best place that they can find out more about this work?
Yeah, Humanature with one N, so HUMANATURE.works. Humanature.works. That's our website.
I love it. All right, Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. If you love it, share it, rate and review it. We love those. And until next time, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.